It appears as though the Israeli government is whipping its population into a paranoid frenzy in order to trigger a nuclear war with the Iranians. There is a massive psychological operation currently underway, being waged by the Israeli government against the Israeli people who are currently, as you can see behind me, stockpiling toilet paper and all the necessary provisions that Western society needs to endure an SHTF situation. And why are they doing this? Well, because the Israeli government attacked Iran. Okay, so think about that. The Iranians are now the boogeyman because they were the ones who were attacked. I mean, you can't make this up. It's almost like a reverse false flag. It's like, we attacked you, but now we're really worried that you're mad and you're going to attack us back. Ergo, you're the bad guy, right? So anyways, right now, as you can see behind me, I have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps flag or emblem behind me, not because I'm an advocate for this at all, don't get it twisted. The reason why I show this is because they've now turned it red on numerous social media channels, signaling that a war is about to start. What are other signals that a war is about to start? Well, maybe it's the panic buying of people and the Israeli government lambasting people with propaganda about how there's going to be mass casualty events and the shelters are open and everybody should be on high alert. The militaries are on the highest state of alert. We're running exercises. We're loading up the bunkers, on and on and on. Well, this is the main barometer right here. Okay, I mean, look at this. This has gone up in the last, I think it's 8 days. It's gone up nearly, I'm not going to say $200, but for every dollar it goes up now, it's about $7 billion in market cap, like market valuation of the precious metals market. And the US dollar that measures it has still remained flat. This is the scariest barometer of all. And of course, oil is going sky high. I was having a chat with my friend Gerald Salente today, who was telling me that he thinks that gold could go to 3,000 this year. That is crazy. 3,000, but it makes sense when you remember that throughout the 70s, the price of gold 10x'd. So if this war starts with Israel and Iran, which it could, because consider what has happened. We're going to see oil and, gold prices. We're going to see a collapse of the global economy, the likes of which we probably have never seen, okay? Now, let's put this in context here. What has actually transpired? 6 months ago, in November, House Resolution 559 was passed. Remember in November when everybody was just talking about Hamas? Where people were loosely connecting the Iranians to what was going on, and they were trying to draw these connections, but there really wasn't a direct link. And then it started being about Hezbollah, and then it started being about the IRGC, and then you had attacks on the US military bases, and they've slowly been bringing us closer to what it is right now. Okay, what it is right now is that the Israelis are actually worried about missiles coming from Iran proper, okay, from the country of Iran into Israeli territory. That is what they are worried about. That is the ultimate endgame. Because recall, back in November of 2023, House Resolution 559 was very quietly passed. What is this resolution and what are the implications? Well, let's talk about it real quick. It reads, whereas international complacency towards Iran's illicit nuclear program threatens the global non-proliferation regime, now therefore be it resolved that the House of Representatives declares it is the policy of the United States that a nuclear Islamic Republic of Iran is not acceptable, that Iran must not be able to obtain a nuclear weapon under any circumstances or conditions, to use all means necessary to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, and most importantly, to recognize and support the freedom of action of partners and allies, including Israel, they highlight them specifically, to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Notice the key word there is prevent. This is pre-crime stuff. So even though they say that the whole point is to ensure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. They're talking about doing it preemptively. So they're talking about either preemptive strikes on Iran, which could very well be what those 2,000-pound JDAM bunker-busting bombs are for, even though looking at the doomsday bunkers of the Iranians, I can't possibly see how those bombs, if what the Russians have been throwing at the Ukrainians hasn't worked, do you really think that, they're going to be able to penetrate these, much less get past the air defenses, if they're lucky enough to get past the air defenses, which they may well, to put enough conventional weaponry on that? I just don't think it's going to happen. And then what does this do? Well, this, of course, is going to put Israel in the crosshairs. Israel is a small geographical drop in the Middle Eastern bucket. They're a very tiny country, minuscule compared to the size of Iran. I mean, they need a certain type of plane just to fly all the way to Iran. Okay, it's that far. They need to refuel and do all this stuff. So the idea, and that Iran could just, activate its proxies, they could light up Saudi Arabia. I mean, they could do so many things. There's so many asymmetrical angles to this. The price of oil skyrockets. They could target the Dimona nuclear power plant. And once you do that, you're going to make a large portion of Israel uninhabitable. And this is the problem with nuclear power plants. They're basically like stationary dirty bombs. And they're the kind of nuclear event that is generational. So whereas a nuclear bomb goes off, Israel, does some ground bursts in Iran to try to take out their bunkers, well, the fallout is going to dissipate rather quickly, within a few weeks. There's going to be, some carcinogenic effects, no doubt, but not nearly as bad as like a Chernobyl type situation that could ensue. And the IRGC have made threats against the Dimona nuclear facility, okay? And it would be definitely in the crosshairs. And you could easily, I don't say easily, but you could overwhelm those systems. You could overwhelm the Israelis' defensive system. So if Israel starts this, it could very well be their undoing. The question is their leader mad enough to want to retain power so desperately enough that he is actually getting ready to start a fight with the Iranians? Because again, look at how they've moved the goalpost. Nobody's talking about Hamas as the boogeyman anymore in Israel. Who is the main threat in these people's minds right now? It's Iran. They're already there. Okay, now recall a couple months ago I said that before this election starts, you're going to see a war with Iran. And it looks like we're well on track to see that. And it seems like the big money, as Gerald Celente would say, the bigs know exactly what is coming. As I said, he predicts gold to hit 3,000. He predicts that they're going to either, one of two things will happen. Okay, either the war is going to cause an economic catastrophe, or it's going to be the war that brings us out of the economic catastrophe. I imagine it's going to be a little bit of both. I imagine that you could see a scenario where war in the Middle East and embargo on oil in the Middle Eastern countries is going to cause the price of oil to just go parabolic. Okay, we're talking in the hundreds of dollars. If that happens, the European economy collapses. The Chinese are probably still going to be okay because they still will have some sort of deal with the Russians. They're not going to be paying market price. I doubt. I suspect that they're going to have some sort of deal with the Russians and even the Iranians to get that support. The question is Iran actually going to attack Israel? I think if they have the backing of the Chinese and the Russians at this point in time, I don't see why they wouldn't. Because I think they have the strategic advantage as it stands. Again, demographically, geographically, Israel is outmanned, and I would probably say outgunned as well when you take into account, just the totality of what their adversaries in that region can bring to bear. Now, this presumes, of course, that Egypt and some other countries might not come to their aid to a certain extent, but again, this is very much a death sentence for the Israelis. If they continue down this path, I think because once you start attacking Iran and Iran starts attacking back, what's likely going to happen is Israel's going to use the Samson option, or they're going to attempt to. This is going to draw the condemnation of the international community. Everybody is, right now, I'd say the majority of the world, definitely the majority of the world, is against what Israel's doing in Gaza. But even the majority in Western countries are against it. In Europe, more so, probably because Europe has more to lose if Israel and Iran start throwing missiles back and forth, because they're very dependent on Middle Eastern oil and resources from the East. Whereas the United States, Canada, Russia, these are countries which actually stand to benefit in a strange way with respect to higher energy prices. It gives Russia more bargaining power with Europe, potentially. So right now you have these major accounts on social media. And what was the final nail in the coffin for me, because, I wouldn't say caught up. I've always understood that our leaders, whenever they say, hey, there's a problem, that's when you should probably just be like, okay, maybe it's not a problem. Like as preppers, when the government comes to a prepper and says, hey, there's a big problem and you got to start getting prepared for it, we're like, okay, well, yeah, sure. I'm not going to lose sleep over this. But when the government says everything's just fine, don't worry, there's not going to be a war, that's when you need to run, okay? And now that a lot of these accounts on social media, I'm not going to name any names, but they are renowned for their talking points that always seem to run parallel to the status quo in the mainstream narratives, the CIA type narratives. Let's just keep it real. And right now, one of these accounts that's very popular tweeted this out. I would recommend that everyone go and fill up their car today because gas might be about to get really expensive. Now, this is an account which seldom makes these types of hyperbolic predictions, okay? The information they share is usually very vague, very general data. Usually, even though it's like propaganda, it's always very accurate. It's just the spin that they put on it, and it's the points that they emphasize, of course, that shape what they're doing as propaganda. So it's not so much that what they're saying is untrue, it's just that they only present one side of the story, okay? And for them to say this signals to me that this is a massive, concerted, psychological operation being waged on the Israeli people to get them to start to associate all the threats that are coming from them from every which way. And while there might be some truth to this, that the tentacles of the Iranian government are what are supplying and feeding these groups, or in some way that they're the nexus of control of it all, at this point in time, who stands to gain from that type of designation as Iran as the main adversary that you need to worry about when you go to sleep at night? Well, it's the Israeli government, because if they want their forever war so they can continue to accomplish whatever long-term strategy they're trying to enact, then they need this war. And I think there's a lot of war hawks in Washington who need that war as well. Now, how does this factor into the broader World War III situation is the question. We still got a major war going on in Ukraine that gets more intense by the day as we approach the peak of the steadfast defender exercises of this looming Russian massive offensive, the bombardment of the critical infrastructure, the power grid. How does this all play into it? Well, a friend of mine was saying that maybe this is actually in Russia's interest for Iran to open up another front with the West. And we need to understand that while there are alliances, while you have the alliance of the North Koreans, the Chinese, the Iranians, some African countries, and the Russians, while these guys are aligned, in Venezuela, I guess, while they're aligned, they still have their own interests that are primary, okay? And so the interests of the alliance as a whole are secondary. So the Russians, in some Machiavellian way, have a vested interest in getting Iran to open up the second front. Now, if the Iranians know they have the backing of the Chinese and the Russians, possibly even under the nuclear umbrella, which I'm not 100% sold on yet, although there is a strategic military partnership there, then they may be willing to go to war. I mean, they, after all, are a net exporter of military products. Okay, they have the missiles that can reach Tel Aviv. They have the proxies that can fire thousands upon thousands, easily overwhelm the Iron Dome system. The wild card here is how involved is America going to get? Is the United States, when this war starts, going to get involved in the conflict? Well, H.R. 559 basically says, House Resolution 559 says exactly that they will, okay? And, you know, right now they're setting the stage for a major event. And the reason why I brought up what that account said when they advised people to go and get gas this weekend, because it's about to get very expensive, because that account is not going to say something like that if there is not going to be some sort of truth to it. Because, of course, accounts like that are very much aligned with the status quo government narratives there and are likely controlled by them are, you know, they still have their credibility that they're trying to preserve as a reliable source of information. So they wouldn't say something like that unless something was, they weren't getting information that something was certainly going to happen. Okay, now whether it was planned or, you know, whether it was something they just allowed to happen is anybody's best guess. It's to be expected that the Iranians are in fact going to respond in some sort of way. Are they going to do it by proxy? Are they going to launch attacks on assets abroad and not directly attack Israel? There's a possibility there. Of course, Israel's being attacked all the time by these smaller groups, but not major attacks. You know, I mean, even the leader of Hezbollah came out today and said, we haven't even started using any big weapons yet. So this isn't even a war, which is surprising considering they've lost like 250 guys since September 11th. They've had their sovereignty infringed upon left and right. So the question really is, like, what are they waiting for? What sort of long-form strategic game are they playing? And eventually, the Iranians have to respond in some sort of demonstrative way to appease the people who are going to think that they're perhaps weaker than they are. Now, they could just understand that, hey, Israel's a small country. If we keep diminishing the Iron Dome, eventually their economy is going to suffer because of the embargo in the Red Sea. They're not going to have the manpower. They're going to see an exodus of more of the people, because remember, most of the immigrants to Israel, these settlers, are dual citizens to other countries, so they can just leave. In fact, the conflict of interest with Russia lies in the fact that many Israeli soldiers are in fact Russian dual citizens. So there's thousands of Russians fighting in Israel, dual citizens. Now, whether they ever intend to go back to Russia or they have any allegiance is anybody's best guess. In fact, I think 9 have already been killed, 9 just Russians, okay? So there's a lot of overlapping geopolitical conflicts of interest, and yeah, Russia and China are really the deciding factors here. Because if they have Iran's back, then Israel's finished. I think they're finished. No matter how many F-35s and F-15Xs and JDAMs, 2,000-pound bombs you throw at the problem, you're just not going to be able to, you know, this is not Iraq. The Iranians have been preparing for this very thing. Saddam Hussein never had something like that. Okay, and this all comes while the Iranians are about to conclude their nuclear program, their underground nuclear power plant program, the Natanz nuclear facility. And of course, now the IAEA is saying that they don't have the amount of oversight required to moderate the program. So everything is just lining up perfectly, just as we laid out, you know, 6 months ago when we first talked about House Resolution 559. This is it. So basically, the summary of what's going on, both the Israelis, the Iranians, it looks like my camera is overheating again. Sorry, guys. These darn cameras, I got to get a fan on it or something. $4,000 cameras, they just don't seem to work when you want them to. Go figure. Israeli in Iran have brought their armed forces to a maximum state of combat readiness. The U.S. military forces in the Middle East have been also placed on high alert. They are awaiting retaliation. Now, again, the Americans apparently had some sort of back channel communication with the Iranians, and there was some agreement made that the Iranians would not target the Americans if they didn't get involved, but nobody's going to believe anybody at this point because the Americans are the ones who are giving the Israelis their weapons. So it's the same sort of song and dance you're seeing with the Russians, okay? The upcoming Iranian response is expected to involve missiles and drones and will be done in a way to avoid a bigger response from Israel, which is like, okay, what is an acceptable response? Are you going to target like a actual proportional response would be Iran is going to take out some Israeli generals, okay? And of course, if they do that, that is going to be seen as excessive and escalatory. So, you know, the Israelis are putting them in a position where they clearly want Iran to attack, to provide them the justification that they need to start a war with Iran, which I think is insanity. I think it's an exercise in self-deletion. Unless they got some sort of wild card up their sleeve or they're crazy enough to try to use the Samson option, which will, again, that's the last card they're going to play. Once the Israelis start throwing nukes at the Iranian nuclear power facilities that are underground, and you can't say the same for the Israelis, which is something else to consider here, that in isolation, the Iranians have been preparing for this. So the Iranians are probably just thinking, okay, we're going to buy as much time as we possibly can. We're going to keep stockpiling shit in these bunkers. And then when the time comes where we have no other choice, that's when we'll go to war. And right now, you have a situation where the Israeli government, not the Israeli people, are trying to start a war with Iran, okay? The U.S. is considering options if Iran does, in fact, retaliate, which is, you know, just listen to that, right? If Iran retaliates for what we did to them, then we're going to consider options, right? I mean, it's pretty clear who the asshole is in this relationship. Israel and the U.S. believe that an Iranian retaliatory strike is inevitable and intense contingency planning is underway. So everybody's on high alert. Iran actually is threatening to destroy Israel now. That's from the leader of the Iranian government, essentially saying that, yeah, the global and universal movement will definitely yield a result, and the people of the world will bear witness to realization of the veritable divine promise and annihilation of the Zionist regime. That is from these guys, okay? So now this is likely going to compel the Iranians to accelerate their nuclear problem, and you know, just all hell is about to break loose. And I mean, we had a crazy earthquake in New York today that was the biggest earthquake in New York in like 140 years. And yeah, just a little blip on the radar. But you know, these are things, people are trying to give that some sort of significance because of the eclipse. And you know, don't get caught up in conflating different unrelated things. Earthquakes happen in that region. Yes, they are rare. But, you know, we don't have to go mixing all this end time stuff. There's plenty enough to worry about and to motivate you to prep and get the hell out of New York City. It's funny because I was interviewing Gerald Celente today and I forgot to ask him about that. And I realized afterwards that, man, I really should have brought that up in our interview. It would have been crazy if it happened while we were doing the interview. Fortunately, not a lot of people were hurt in that incident. So anyways, I mean, we could talk all about what's going on in Russia. My camera may well overheat. I wanted to do the Israeli pending nuclear conflict with Iran issue justice. I think we did that. Ukraine did a massive attack into Russia yesterday, targeting all sorts of military bases. They took out several warplanes, so they claim. A lot of Ukrainian cities are becoming uninhabitable due to the lack of power. Okay, so people are going to start naturally moving westward where it's a little bit safer. Finland has sealed the border with Russia indefinitely, so that was a temporary measure that was put into place. Now Finland, of course, who's going to be opening their bases up, as well as Norway, to the Americans to come in, have now basically closed off their border with Russia. So talk about a bad sign. The Pentagon is getting ready to place a weapons storage facility, an Army Prepositioning Area, an APS, which will house weapons, ammunition, vehicles, fuel, uniforms, rations, and much more that can be useful when hostilities begin. They're going to situate that in the Arctic. Okay, this was stated by Deputy Commander of the U.S. Army Materiel Command, Christopher Mohan. That's going to be in Norway, because of course the U.S. just arbitrarily decided that they were going to lay claim to part of the Arctic Ocean recently, not too long ago, when they realized that, oh shit, the Russians have a whole plan. They got icebreakers, they've been planning this for years, and here we are just playing catch-up, reacting as per usual. The Russians are now vowing to take no prisoners. Dmitry Medvedev made a very powerful statement today. Yes, he's very incorrigible, but it seems like his language becomes more and more dark every tweet that he throws out there. So don't take prisoners. Medvedev called for rewards to be given to Russian soldiers for every NATO member killed in Ukraine, according to him. So they're going to single out NATO members, and they want to reward every NATO troop, who are, of course, right now are not going to be in NATO uniform, but they want to reward their people for killing them. Ukraine is preparing more terrorist attacks in Belarus. This is according to Belarusian intelligence. While agents of the Ukrainian Special Forces Services are being detained on Belarusian soil, Ukraine and the West understand perfectly that even Russia's closest ally, Belarus, will not enter into the confrontation between former republics of the USSR until it is itself attacked. In this regard, the terrorist state of Ukraine, which wants to expand the conflict to the Baltic Sea, is developing future provocations on Belarusian soil, and Kiev's Western patrons have created an information curtain trying to cover up the perpetrator in advance. We have Jake Sullivan basically saying that, was it Jake Sullivan? No, it was Anthony Blinken who basically said, yeah, Ukraine's going to become a member of NATO, which is, you know, a big red line. Now they're floating the idea that, and I think we talked about this months ago, that if Ukraine concedes some of its territory, what remains is going to become a member of NATO. Essentially saying that, you know, Ukraine is going to lose a lot of territory pretty soon. Netherlands is embarking on a conscription. This week, approximately 200,000 young people who are or will be 17 years old this year will receive a so-called conscription letter. That doesn't mean all 200,000 are going to get drafted, but it just states that they've been registered for military service. Interesting. There was a benign nuclear incident that happened in Russia. I didn't pay too much attention to it because it's benign. It was a radiation leak, and I think it was detected all the way into Norway in certain places. But again, this was not a nuclear incident in the sense that we've come to be concerned about on this channel. It was a radiological incident as a result. I think it was a radon leak or something to that effect. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys today. We were going to release a series of videos over the weekend, but the communist camera crew is currently sick, so we'll get to that next week. But we do have one video that's going to be released over the weekend, and it's a very useful tool, probably one of the best things that I've used that everybody should have in their home, on their home, okay, hint, hint. And this is just one of those things that, you know, every so often a product comes along that's so simple and so cost effective, but so useful and so practical for everyday home security that it just blows me away. And we tested it out. We put it to the test. It was a lot of fun. So you guys are going to want to stick around for that. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. The best way to support the channel is CanadianPreparedness.com. Thanks for watching.